It's okay. Just relax.
Wait. What are you doing?
This woman cared for a dying man for 5 years, and when he left her $7.5 million, his family tried to kill her for it. Grace Okafor didn't know that kindness could cost you your life, but she was about to find out. Before we continue, let me take this opportunity to thank you so much for supporting our channel. Just choosing to watch our video means a lot to us. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this is your first time here. Grace was 32 when she took the job, a caregiver position in Westchester County, New York. The pay was decent, the hours were long, but she needed the work. She'd been sending money back home to Nigeria for years, her mother's medical bills, her younger brother's school fees. This job would help. The man she'd be caring for was Arthur Pennington, 76 years old, widowed, sick with congestive heart failure and diabetes. His children had hired her through an agency. They made it clear during the interview, keep him comfortable, keep him alive, don't bother them unless it's an emergency. Grace met Arthur on a cold morning in March. The house was enormous, a colonial estate with white columns and manicured hedges. Inside, it smelled like old wood and loneliness. Arthur sat in a wheelchair by the window, thin, pale. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up at her. "You're the new one," he said. His voice was weak, but not unkind. "Yes, sir. My name is Grace." "Grace." He repeated it slowly, like he was testing the word. "That's a good name." She smiled. "Thank you." "The last 3 didn't last a month," he said. "My son says I'm difficult." Grace pulled up a chair beside him. "Well, Mr. Pennington, let's see if we can prove him wrong." That first day, she learned his routines. Medications at 8, noon, and 6. Physical therapy exercises twice a day. Meals that followed a strict low-sodium diet. Arthur didn't talk much at first. He watched her, studied her, like he was waiting for her to fail or leave like the others. But Grace didn't leave. She showed up every morning at 7. She prepared his meals with care, not just following the diet, but making the food taste like something worth eating. She read to him when he couldn't sleep. She listened when he wanted to talk about his late wife, Margaret, who died 3 years earlier. "Margaret would have liked you," he said one evening, 2 months into Grace's time there. Grace looked up from the book she'd been reading aloud. "Why do you say that?" Arthur said, "Because you're real. You don't pretend. You don't put on a show. You just are." Grace felt something shift in that moment. This wasn't just a job anymore. Arthur's children visited rarely. His son, Richard, was a corporate attorney in Manhattan, too busy, always too busy. His daughter, Victoria, lived in Connecticut with her investment banker husband. She came by once every few months, stayed for 20 minutes, and left. They never asked Arthur how he was feeling. They asked about his documents, his accounts, his plans. Grace saw the hurt in his eyes every time they left. "Do you have children, Grace?" Arthur asked one afternoon. "Not yet," she said. "Maybe someday." "Don't wait too long," he said quietly. "And when you do, make sure they know you love them, really know it, because money makes people forget." The second year was harder than the first. Arthur's heart was failing faster now. Some mornings he couldn't get out of bed without help. His breathing grew labored. The oxygen tank became a permanent fixture by his side. Grace adjusted. She learned to anticipate his needs before he asked. She knew when the pain was bad by the way he gripped the armrest. She knew when he was lonely by the way he stared out the window to nothing. "Tell me about Nigeria," he said one rainy afternoon. Grace was folding his laundry. She paused. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Your family, your home, why you left." So she told him. about Lagos, about her mother who sold fabric in the market, about her father who died when she was 12, about her brother Samuel who wanted to be a doctor but couldn't afford university, about how she came to America with a dream and found herself wiping down counters at a diner for 3 years before she got her caregiver certification.
Arthur listened to every word. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he said when she finished. Grace smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I don't feel strong most days." "That's how you know you are," Arthur said. Richard called that week, not to check on his father, to complain about the credit card bill. "Dad, you're spending too much on groceries. What the hell is Grace buying?" Arthur's jaw tightened. Grace could hear Richard's voice through the phone, sharp and accusatory. "She's buying food, Richard, food that I can actually eat. Or would you prefer I starve on your budget?" There was silence on the other end. Then Richard hung up. Arthur looked at Grace, exhausted. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "You don't need to apologize for him," Grace said gently. But she saw the sadness in his eyes, the kind that comes from knowing your own children see you as a burden. Victoria visited in December. She brought a poinsettia and stayed for 15 minutes. "Daddy, we need to talk about your assets," she said, not even sitting down. "Richard and I think it's time to start moving things into a trust for tax purposes." Arthur stared at her. "I'm not dead yet, Victoria." "I know that, but we need to be smart about this. You're not getting any younger." Grace excused herself to the kitchen, but she could still hear them. "You don't visit," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "You don't call unless you want something. And now you want to manage my money while I'm still breathing?" "Don't be dramatic," Grace said coldly. "We're trying to protect the family." "What family?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. Victoria left without saying goodbye. Grace found Arthur crying in his chair that night. Not loud, just silent tears running down his weathered face. She sat beside him and held his hand. She didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing to say. "Grace," he whispered, "you're the only one who treats me like I still matter." "You do matter, Mr. Pennington." "Arthur," he said, "please call me Arthur." By year 3, Grace had become more than a caregiver. She was his companion, his confidant. The daughter his own children had stopped being. She brought him books from the library. She played chess with him, even though he won every time. She sat with him during thunderstorms because they reminded him of Margaret and made him sad. Arthur started talking about his will. "I'm changing it," he said one morning out of nowhere. Grace was preparing his medication. "That's your business, Arthur. You don't need to tell me." "But I want to," he said. "Richard and Victoria, they'll get the house, some accounts, but the bulk of it, I'm leaving it to you." Grace's hands froze. "Arthur, no, you can't." $7.5 million, he said firmly. "You've earned it. You've given me 5 years of dignity when my own blood couldn't give me 5 minutes. Your children will never accept that." Arthur's eyes were clear and determined. "I don't care what they accept. It's my money, my life, my choice." Grace felt a chill run down her spine, not from gratitude, from fear, because she knew what money did to people. Arthur had told her himself, "Money makes people forget, and sometimes it makes them dangerous." Arthur called his lawyer in April of the 5th year. Grace wasn't supposed to hear the conversation, but Arthur's hearing had gotten worse, and he spoke louder on the phone now. "I want it ironclad, Leonard. No loopholes, no contests. Grace Okafor gets $7.5 million. Make sure it's bulletproof." Leonard Hirsch had been Arthur's attorney for 30 years. He tried to talk him out of it.
Arthur, your children will fight this. You know they will. Let them fight, Arthur said. Grace has given me more in 5 years than they've given me in 50. She deserves it. The new will was signed on May 3rd. 2 witnesses, notarized, legal. Arthur seemed lighter after that, like a weight had been lifted. Grace felt the opposite. You should tell them, she said one evening, Richard and Victoria. They should know before it's too late. Arthur shook his head. If I tell them now, they'll make my last days miserable. They'll contest my competency. They'll drag you through hell while I'm still here to see it. No, they'll find out when I'm gone. Grace didn't sleep well that night, or the nights after. Richard showed up unannounced in June. He brought Victoria with him. Grace answered the door. Richard pushed past her without a greeting. Where's Dad? He's resting, Grace said. He had a rough morning. Wake him up, Victoria said, brushing past her as well. We need to talk to him. Grace followed them to Arthur's bedroom. He was awake, sitting up against his pillows, oxygen tube in his nose. What's this about? Arthur asked, his voice tired. Richard pulled out his phone and showed him the screen. This is your bank statement, Dad. You transferred $50,000 last month. Where did it go? Arthur's expression didn't change. I donated it to a children's hospital in Lagos. Grace told me about it. They needed equipment. Victoria's face went red. Are you donating $50,000 to Nigeria? Are you insane? It's my money, Arthur said calmly. It's our inheritance, Richard snapped. The room went silent. Arthur looked at his son with something close to disgust. Get out. Dad, get out, both of you. They left, but Grace saw the fury in their eyes, the suspicion. They looked at her like she was a thief. That night, Richard called. Grace answered because Arthur was too exhausted. Put my father on the phone, Richard demanded. He's asleep. Then you listen to me, Richard said, his voice low and venomous. I don't know what you're doing to him, but if you think you're getting anything from this family, you're wrong. When he dies, we'll make sure you don't see a dime. You're just the help. Remember that. Grace hung up without responding. Her hands were shaking. Arthur got sicker in July. The doctor said it was a matter of weeks now, maybe days. Grace never left his side. She slept in the chair next to his bed. She held his hand when the pain got bad. She prayed with him even though they came from different faiths, because comfort has no religion. Grace, he whispered one night, his breathing shallow, promise me something. Anything. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them take what's yours. You fought for me. Now fight for yourself. I will, though she didn't know if she meant it. Arthur Pennington died on August 9th at 6:47 in the morning. Grace was holding his hand. She felt the moment his spirit left, a lightness in the air, a stillness that was both peaceful and devastating. She called Richard and Victoria. They arrived within 2 hours. Victoria cried, loud, performative tears. Richard stood stone-faced, already scrolling through his phone. We'll handle the arrangements, Richard said to Grace without looking at her. You can pack your things and leave by the end of the week. Grace nodded. She didn't have the energy to argue. The funeral was 3 days later. Grace wasn't invited to sit with the family. She stood in the back. The reading of the will happened the following week. Leonard Hirsch called Grace and asked her to attend. She walked into that conference room and saw Richard and Victoria already seated. Their expressions were smug, entitled. Leonard opened the document and began to read. Grace watched the color drain from their faces when they heard the number. $7.5 million. to Grace Okafor. Richard stood up so fast his chair fell backward. This is fraud. She manipulated him. He wasn't in his right mind. Your father was mentally competent, Leonard said firmly. I evaluated him personally. This will is legal and binding. Victoria was shaking with rage. We'll contest it. We'll fight this until she doesn't have a cent left for legal fees. Leonard looked at Grace. You have 30 days to claim the inheritance. I suggest you prepare yourself. This won't be easy. Grace walked out of that office knowing her life had just changed, but she didn't know yet how much danger she was really in. The threats started immediately. Richard called Grace's phone 17 times the day after the will reading. She didn't answer. He left voicemails, each one angrier than the last. You manipulated a sick old man. You're a con artist. We'll prove it in court and you'll go to prison. Victoria went a different route. She posted on social media, calling Grace a predator who targeted wealthy elderly people. She didn't use Grace's full name, but the message was clear. Friends and strangers alike shared it. The comments were vicious. Grace's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Unknown numbers, threatening texts. Go back to Africa. You'll regret stealing from this family. Watch your back. Leonard Hirsch advised her to get a lawyer immediately. She did. His name was David Kim, a sharp probate attorney who'd seen family inheritance battles turn ugly before. They'll try to prove undue influence, David explained during their first meeting. They'll say you isolated him from his family, manipulated him emotionally, coerced him into changing the will. Do you have any documentation, witnesses, anything that shows the relationship was genuine? Grace thought for a moment. I kept a journal, every day for 5 years. I wrote about Arthur, his moods, his health, what we talked about. I never thought I'd need it for this. That journal might save you, David said. Bring it to me. The court case began in October. Richard and Victoria spared no expense. They hired a team of attorneys who painted Grace as a calculating opportunist. They brought in a psychologist who testified that elderly people with declining health are vulnerable to manipulation. They had no proof, but they didn't need proof. They just needed doubt. Grace sat in that courtroom day after day, listening to them destroy her character, listening to them describe Arthur as a confused, helpless victim instead of the sharp, decisive man he'd been until the very end. David fought back hard. He presented Grace's journal, 5 years of handwritten entries that showed a genuine, caring relationship. He brought in Arthur's doctor, who testified that Arthur was mentally sound when he changed his will. He showed phone records proving that Richard and Victoria barely contacted their father in his final years. The judge seemed sympathetic, but the case dragged on for months. That's when things got darker. Grace was leaving the courthouse one evening in late November when a black SUV pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. It was Richard. Get in, he said. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Grace, his voice was different now, calm, almost friendly. Please, just 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, she got in. Richard drove to a parking garage and stopped on the empty top level. He turned off the engine. This doesn't have to be a war, he said. We can settle this right now, outside of court. I'm listening. We'll give you $500,000, cash. You walk away from the will, we drop the lawsuit, and everyone moves on with their lives. Grace stared at him. Your father left me $7.5 million. You're offering me half of $1 million? It's more than you had before you met him, Richard said. His tone was harder now. Take it, Grace, because if you don't, things are going to get very difficult for you. Is that a threat? Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It's reality. You have no family here, no protection. No one will miss you if something happens. Grace's blood ran cold. She opened the car door and got out. I'll see you in court. She walked to the elevator, her heart pounding. When she looked back, Richard was watching her with dead eyes. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She called David and told him what happened. File a restraining order, he said immediately. That was witness intimidation at minimum. But before Grace could do anything, the situation escalated. 2 days later, someone broke into her apartment. Nothing was stolen, but the place was trashed, furniture overturned, pictures shattered, and on her bathroom mirror, written in red lipstick, "Leave or die." Grace called the police. They took a report. They dusted for fingerprints, but they found nothing. "Do you have enemies?" the officer asked. Grace almost laughed. "I'm in the middle of a $7 million inheritance fight." The officer nodded knowingly. "Might want to stay somewhere else for a while." Grace moved to a cheap motel near the airport. She told no one where she was, not even David. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. On December 4th, Grace was walking to her car after a hearing. She noticed a man following her, tall, white, wearing a dark jacket. She walked faster. So did he. She broke into a run. He ran too. Grace made it to her car and locked the doors. The man stood 10 feet away, staring at her. He didn't try to hide his face. He wanted her to know she was being watched. He pulled out his phone, made a call, and walked away. Grace sat in that car for 20 minutes, shaking. That night, David called her with news. "The judge is leaning in our favor. He's indicated that without concrete evidence of manipulation, he's likely to uphold the will. We could have a ruling within 2 weeks." Grace should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt terrified, because she knew what desperate people were capable of, and Richard and Victoria Pennington were very, very desperate. The call came at 2 a.m. Grace was half asleep in her motel room when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer.
"Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice, low and unfamiliar. "Grace Okafor, you're in room 217 at the Airport Inn. Blue Honda Civic in the parking lot. You should have taken the money." The line went dead. Grace was out of bed in seconds. She threw everything into her bag. Clothes, documents, Arthur's photograph. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip the suitcase. She didn't check out. She just ran. Grace drove through the night with no destination. She checked her rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Every set of headlights behind her felt like a threat. At dawn, she pulled into a gas station 2 hours away and called David from a payphone. "They know where I am," she said, her voice breaking. "They're going to kill me." "Grace, listen to me. Go to the police. File a report right now." "The police won't do anything until I'm already dead," Grace said. "I need to disappear." "If you disappear, you forfeit the case. They win." Grace closed her eyes. Arthur's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't let them bully you. Fight for yourself." "Then I need proof," Grace said. "Something that proves they're threatening me. Something the police can't ignore." David was quiet for a moment. "That's dangerous." "Living is dangerous right now." They came up with a plan. Grace would return to the area, but stay mobile. David would file an emergency motion with the court, citing the threats and requesting immediate resolution of the case. Meanwhile, Grace would try to record any further contact from Richard or Victoria. It was risky, but it was all she had. 3 days later, Grace received a text from an unknown number. "Final offer, $750K. Meet us tonight, 9 p.m. Warehouse on Miller Street. Come alone or the deal disappears." Grace forwarded the text to David, then to the police. The detective she'd been working with, a woman named Martinez, finally took her seriously. "Don't go," Martinez said. "Let us handle this." But Grace knew how this worked. Without evidence, without catching them in the act, nothing would stick.
Richard and Victoria would claim they never sent the text. They'd say Grace was making it all up to win sympathy. "I'm going," Grace said, "but I want you there, undercover, close enough to help if things go wrong." Martinez didn't like it, but she agreed. That night, Grace drove to the warehouse with her phone recording in her pocket and a police tracker hidden in her jacket. The building was abandoned, broken windows, graffiti on the walls, the smell of rust and decay. Grace's car headlights cut through the darkness as she pulled up. Richard and Victoria were already there, standing beside their Mercedes. They weren't alone. Two men stood with them, large, unfriendly. One of them was the man who'd followed Grace to her car. Grace got out slowly, her heart hammering. "You came," Victoria said. She sounded surprised. "I want this over," Grace said, keeping her voice steady. "Show me the money." Richard held up a briefcase. "It's all here. 750,000, cash. You sign the paper, you take the money, and you disappear." Grace walked closer. "Let me see it." Richard opened the case, stacks of bills. It looked real. "The paper," Grace said. Victoria handed her a document. Grace pretended to read it, stalling for time. She needed them to say something incriminating. "Where do I sign?" "Not yet," Richard said, closing the briefcase. "First, we need assurances." "What kind of assurances?" "That you'll never speak to anyone about this, that you'll never come back, that you'll get on a plane to Nigeria and stay there." Grace met his eyes. "And if I don't?" Victoria stepped forward. "Then we'll make sure you never speak to anyone about anything ever again." There it was. "You're threatening to kill me," Grace said clearly, making sure her phone caught every word. "We're offering you a choice," Richard said coldly. "Take the money and live, or refuse and accidents happen." One of the men moved toward Grace. She took a step back. "Accidents like breaking into my apartment? Like following me? Like calling me in the middle of the night?" "You're paranoid," Victoria said, but her smile was cruel. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole our father's money." "I didn't steal anything. Arthur gave it to me because you abandoned him." Richard's face twisted with rage. "He was a senile old man, and you manipulated him, and now you're going to pay for it." He nodded to one of the men. That's when the police moved in. Lights flooded the warehouse. Car doors slammed. Detective Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Police! Nobody move!" The two hired men ran. Richard and Victoria froze. Grace stood perfectly still, tears streaming from her face, not from fear, but from relief. Richard and Victoria were arrested that night. The charges: conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, extortion. Grace's recording was crystal clear. The text messages were traced back to a burner phone purchased with Victoria's credit card. The case fell apart after that. With criminal charges pending, Richard and Victoria's attorneys withdrew the will contest. The judge ruled in Grace's favor. Grace Okafor received all $7.5 million. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not at first. She sat in her new apartment, safe, secure, paid in full, and thought about Arthur, about the man who'd seen her worth when his own children couldn't see past their greed. She thought about what he'd told her. Money makes people forget. But money had also revealed who they truly were all along. Grace didn't keep all of it for herself. She sent $2 million to Nigeria, funded her brother's medical school, paid for her mother's surgery, built a clinic in their village. She donated another $1 million to the children's hospital Arthur had supported. The rest she invested wisely. She went back to school. She started a foundation to help immigrant caregivers facing legal battles with families of the deceased. And every year on August 9th, she visited Arthur's grave and thanked him, not for the money, but for seeing her, for valuing her, for teaching her that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing a person can offer. Richard and Victoria Pennington were sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. They lost everything, their reputations, their freedom, and the respect of anyone who knew the truth. Grace never felt sorry for them. Some people spend their whole lives chasing money. Others spend their lives earning something more valuable, dignity. Arthur knew the difference, and in the end, so did Grace. So let me ask you, do you think justice was served? What would you have done in Grace's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. We share real stories about real people every week, stories that remind us what truly matters. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness is never wasted. Even when others try to take everything from you, they can never take who you are.